Hey traders, welcome back to the weekly Forex Forecast. It is the final video of 2023. Next week, the first trading week of 2024, we do have New Year's Day on the Monday and non-farm payrolls on the Friday. So we do have a bit of a shortened week next week. However, US dollar shorts once again are in play as one of the best setups and themes going into next week. And I'm going to show you in today's video not just US dollar short setups that I'm looking at, but also we're going to look at some very good Swiss franc long setups heading into next week. This is the final weekend you can get the brand new Hedge-Trading app for free for an entire year. The December offer does expire at the end of this weekend. Anybody who has signed up to GMT going into the new year on January the 1st will get also the brand new trading app Hedge- for free for an entire 12 months. We've been running this offer throughout December and it is now coming to an end this weekend. So if you'd like to take advantage of that offer before it expires on January the 1st, you can check out the description and also the pinned comment below this video for more details. So if we look at the scores for the coming week, you can see it is the US dollar which sits right at the bottom of the majors here. And this is the weakest, I'd say upside alongside. This is the highest score in this sense to the downside. And it is putting US dollar shorts as my number one theme going into next week. I do think we probably bottom out sometime in Q1, but it's not quite ready and we're not seeing any of the data showing that we should be long dollars just yet. The second thing to notice about the US dollar is we did get the fear and greed meter showing fear coming into the dollar index a couple of days ago. It's a 70% chance of pausing or reversing higher. And this did wash out as we saw a bounce in the dollar. However, we have not yet seen the Swiss franc, the Aussie dollar, the New Zealand dollar, and the Canadian dollar, for example, washing out this kind of greed sentiment that we've been seeing over here. So going into next week, the first thing to notice is the US dollar probably is going to pop a little bit higher off the bat. So if you are trading dollar shorts next week, don't be surprised to see it kind of moving higher first on Tuesday, maybe even into Wednesday. The second thing after dollar shorts that I am really interested in next week is Swiss franc long plays. This is at the top of the scorecards of the majors here. We do have, very similar to I just discussed here with the US dollar, we do have the Swiss franc still showing greed, 70% chance of pausing or reversing lower near term over, and this is over a daily, so rolling daily time horizon. And what that means is, again, if you're going to step in, for example, and look at US dollar Swiss franc to the downside, just be prepared. You may see that kind of push higher into Tuesday and Wednesday as we get sentiment washing out of the Swiss franc. So US dollar Swiss franc is absolutely my number one currency pair heading into next week, which I do like. We're also going to be looking at Aussie dollar to the upside. And we can also look at, and we're going to in today's video, New Zealand dollar to the upside. Now, I don't like New Zealand dollar longs as much as I do Swiss franc and Aussie longs. So these are my two favorite longs heading into next week. But because of the weakness of the dollar, I am prepared to put New Zealand dollar longs on the table as well. Swiss franc long is my second favorite theme heading into next week. We've already discussed US dollar franc to the downside, but I'm also going to be interested in pound franc to the downside and also CAD franc to the downside. So looking to be short US dollar franc, pound franc, and also CAD franc given the opportunity next week. After the Swiss franc pairs then, I do like in third place as a theme next week, pound shorts. We've already discussed pound franc to the downside, but I'm also going to be interested in pound Aussie to the downside we'll look at in today's video. And also, perhaps you can put pound New Zealand on the table as well. We'll look at that in today's video. But again, pound franc to the downside, pound Aussie to the downside, I prefer next week over pound New Zealand, even though we'll look at it in today's video. And the final market we're going to be looking at heading into next week then is Aussie CAD to the upside. It's not my favorite pair, but it is a potential opportunity and I am going to be looking for long plays in Aussie CAD next week, given the chance. Starting as always with crude oil. Now, crude oil is a market that I do like to the short side. I do not think it's one of the best opportunities next week, but I do like crude oil for short. So I would not be buying this next week. So I want to see one of two things. We have started to break out of this near-term move higher, and I would like to see the market pulling back. And I'm going to be looking as it pulls back for any intra-week breakout down to the prior low and also beyond the 68.26. And once you get past these levels, especially to the downside or the upside here, you tend to have a 70% chance of pausing or reversing once you breach these levels. That is what the market is pricing, and that is what's being shown in the hedge dash algorithm here. The second thing I want to see therefore next week in crude oil is if we just continue to push higher and instead of breaking out intra-week, we trade into the 74.69, especially if we breach this area and perhaps test the prior high as resistance. This would be a great place next week to start to look for a near-term short opportunity in crude oil. So the first Forex pair we're going to look at, and my favorite Forex pair heading into next week, is US dollar Swiss franc to the downside. You can see this market has just been in a big downtrend, and this has been highlighted as a good short in the hedge dash algorithm. You can see this is a market that has just had a big sell-off. And going back to what we discussed in the scorecard section, where the US dollar may need to push a bit higher, we may need to see the Swiss franc actually pulling back a little bit. I would not be surprised, and in fact, I would expect for this market to actually consolidate a little bit more, and any continued pullback next week would be viewed perhaps on Tuesday or Wednesday to look for the opportunity for this to break out intra-week, back down to the prior low and onto the 0.8312. And if we fail to break out intra-week and we just continue to pull back, in terms of, two opportunities here, buying as a breakout or buying on the pullback opportunity I would look for is if we start to breach the 0.8513, and you can see there's a really nice prior low here as well, which we broke through with momentum. We come back and test this area above the 0.8513 is where I'm going to be looking for a near-term short opportunity in this market next week. Next is Aussie dollar. This is a market that has also been trending nicely, this time to the upside. And we've started to pull back a little bit, but we're quite near the top. I would not be surprised to see a bigger pullback in this, especially as the Australian dollar may need to wash out some of that greed that we've been seeing and we looked at in the scorecard section. So any continued pullback, I'm looking for this market to pull back next week. If we get an intra-week breakout, I will be looking for potential long opportunities into the prior high and onto the 0.6905. And if we just continue to pull back, you can see there is a key of resistance here, and it was tested on the overside here, broke through, tested. So there's a nice key area of support and resistance right where the 0.67250 is. So if we trade into this, this is going to be the second place next week. I'll look for a near-term buying opportunity in Aussie dollar. So third US dollar pair I like going into next week is New Zealand dollar to the upside. I do prefer US dollar Swiss franc to the downside given the chance, and also Aussie dollar to the upside. I prefer those two. However, New Zealand dollar longs are on my watch list next week. Any pullback in this market, I'm going to be looking for one of two trades, either a breakout trade intra-week where we start to rally towards the upper bound, and I'll be looking for a pullback and a follow through into the 0.6405. Or if we just continue lower, and one of the reasons why I like to have very clean charts here is because I like to look for where this range overlays onto key areas of resistance or support for confluence. Because the market pricing of this range, which is 70% chance of kind of holding between this range, that's what the market is currently pricing. If we can overlay that onto key areas of support and resistance, we get an additional benefit of the market likely bouncing there. We get better probabilities. And I can eye off here, I can see there is a high over here, and also there's some lows over here. So you can almost zone this like this in terms of the previous high and the previous low. And you can see the level sits right in it. So if we pull back and we breach the 0.6236, this is the second place on a pullback next week. I'd be interested in near-term buying opportunity in New Zealand dollar. And the final dollar pair we're going to look at in today's video is euro dollar. This is a market we cover every single week, so I don't like this market as much as I like the other markets. I do think we see new highs in euro dollar coming into January, but I would much rather trade New Zealand dollar to the upside, Aussie dollar to the upside, or especially US dollar franc to the downside. So coming into this week, the slight issue with this market is we have a Forex pair with two currencies in the short side of the hedge dash algorithm. They're both quite good shorts. But the US dollar is clearly the better short, highlighted by the algorithm. So going into next week on a relative basis, I do favor further upside in euro dollar. Because of the fact that both of these currencies are kind of neutral, I would probably filter an intra-week trade here. So I will be looking for potential breakout intra-week, but if we start to break out like this intra-week and we start to head up to the prior high and the 1.11470, we're probably also going to see US dollar franc breaking out intra-week as well. And I would much rather short US dollar franc than go long euro dollar. So I'll probably filter this out. You can look for it if you so wish. However, I'll probably filter it out. However, if we do come back and we trade into the prior low and we start to break below the 1.09350, this is the place on the pullback I'd probably be more interested in a short-term buying opportunity in euro dollar. Moving on to the franc pairs, looking at pound franc, and one of the things you'll notice here is very often just by taking the best scoring markets in the hedge dash algorithm, you'll be put in front of markets which are doing this, which are moving, as opposed to the choppy markets. In fact, that's what hedge dash is primarily for. It's portfolio selection. It cuts out a lot of the choppy markets and just puts in front of you the best markets which are kind of in play. And you can see this kind of momentum to the downside. This is going to, in all likelihood, be followed by further downside. So going into next week, I do like this market to the downside. Very much like US dollar, Swiss franc, I would not be surprised to see this correcting and pausing first. And if we start to pull back and we start to correct, this sets up the opportunity to look for a breakout trade intra-week down to the previous low and also the 1.0617. Not likely to get too much more out of it once we pass this. Only a 30% chance of actually moving significantly below the 1.0617. So it's a good profit taking opportunity down here if we can get involved with this on a breakout. Or if we just continue to pull back, and we test the underside of the prior low over here and also trade above the 1.0828. This is the second place I'll be looking for a near-term short opportunity in pound franc next week. I cannot be long this market. I can either short it or do nothing. Buying this market is not an option for me next week. And the final franc pair here is CAD franc. Now this is a market highlighted to the downside in the hedge dash algorithm, and you can see really nice breakout with momentum, and we broke out of this head and shoulders pattern, and this is actually where we saw the momentum coming in. So going into next week, I do like this market further downside. I'm going to be looking for this market to pull back. And when we talk about confluence of the range overlaying, onto the price action, look at the prior low over here. There's clearly a significant low here, clearly a significant low here, clearly a significant low here. We tried to break below it here and we failed. So going into next week, the 0.64270 in terms of looking for a kind of sell the rip opportunity or selling on a pullback, that is exactly where I'd be looking. For those of you who like, trend lines as well, there's probably another intersection over here at the same place. But any pullback next week towards this level is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for an intra-week breakout. Usually on the 1 hours, I like to drop down, look for this intra-week into the 0.6282. And if we fail to break out intra-week, we just continue to pull back and we test the prior lows over here and at the same time breach the 0.64270. And trading above here is the key. Everything else is confluence to that. But if we trade above the 0.64270, this is going to be the second place next week. I'll look for a near-term short in CAD franc. Moving on to the pound pairs, starting with pound Aussie. Now, notice with pound Aussie, it's a little bit choppy here. And that's because pound Aussie to the downside is not as good as some of the other markets highlighted, like US dollar, Swiss franc. So when you see this kind of choppiness, intra-week trading can be a little bit more tricky. I do prefer these ones from the upper and lower bounds. However, you still can look for a breakout intra-week if you start to see that price action forming. So going into this week, any continued pullback towards the 1.8890 is viewed as an opportunity to start to look for an intra-week breakout on the 1 hours, most likely down to the 1.8521. And if we just continue higher, if we hold this range, what I do like about this is there's a major low over here, which was broken, tested, and then broken. If we come back and we breach the 1.8890, this is the second place next week. I'll be looking for a near-term short opportunity in pound Aussie. And the final pound pair is pound New Zealand. Now, this is one of my least favorite markets based on the fact that the New Zealand dollar is actually reversing lower in the scorecard. So Aussie longs, US dollar shorts, and also Swiss franc longs are my top plays. However, I am looking potentially, I'm keeping this on the watch list, and I will take advantage of an opportunity if I get given it next week. So any pullback in this market is viewed as an opportunity to look for an intra-week breakout on the lower time frames down to the 1.99680. And if we continue to pull back again, look at how we have a nice kind of low over here, tests again quite deeply, and then it fails, and look at how it comes back and tests once it succeeds on the underside here. So that's a very good sign when you have this test, you break, and then you pull back and retest, that there's a good key area of resistance up here. So if we break the 2.0365 and we kind of trade above the 2.040, this is going to be the second place and probably the preferable place next week on the pullback to look for a near-term short in pound New Zealand. Wrapping up the Forex pairs with Aussie CAD. It's my least favorite pair, but it is on the watch list, and I'm going to keep an eye out for a potential buying opportunity. I would prefer to trade this from the lower bound than intra-week, given the chance next week, because you can see again, is a little bit more choppy compared to some of those other markets like the dollar pairs. So any pullback in this market is viewed as a potential opportunity intra-week for a breakout, although again, I would prefer to trade this one from the lower bound next week into the prior high and also onto the 0.9107. And again, preferably if we hold this and we just trend all the way down and we test this low here, so we break below the 0.8934 and we start to break below this low here, this is the second place and the preferable place next week. I'd be looking for a near-term bounce in AudCad. And usually when I'm trying to take advantage of these bounces in these markets, usually I'm only looking to capture a day or two's worth of movement. Okay, so wrapping up the video with gold and silver, starting with gold because out of the two, I am bullish on both, especially with that very weak score in the US dollar and that very bearish bias on the US dollar going into next week. But out of the two, gold to the upside is the one I like the most. You can see we've already started to correct and to pull back. So what I'm going to be looking for is any continued pullback this week. I'm going to be looking for a potential breakout. And with those currencies which are very, very bearish or bullish, those are the markets which very often give you the best kind of breakout opportunities intra-week. And the US dollar is the weakest by far. So I'm going to be looking for potential intra-week breakout in gold to the upside into the 2109.82. If I do get involved in gold and we start to trade above this level, this is the opportunity. The odds start to turn against you for further upside. Doesn't mean it can't go higher, it just means the odds start to turn against you. They're not in your favor anymore. So above this level, I would be looking at booking short-term profits intra-week. However, if we continue to trade all the way back and we just pull down, testing these lows, maybe even push through, you know, the deeper test, the better actually. If we test down below here and we start to trade into either of these lows here, this is the second place next week on the pullback. I would be looking for a potential long opportunity in gold. And last but not least, we have silver. Now, I do think silver, in all probability, heads higher. I am bullish on silver. I cannot sell silver because of that very bearish bias on the US dollar in the hedge dash algorithm. I cannot short this market. I can either buy it or do nothing. Selling this market is not an option for me next week. So any pullback in this market is viewed as an opportunity to look for an intra-week breakout because we do have a very, very weak dollar. I'm going to be looking up towards the 24.80. And if we continue to pull back and we fail to break out, we just hold this kind of trend and we trend down and we test the 23.24 and we start to breach this to the downside. There is a nice high here in the 4 hours, which I'd be interested to see if we could tag this. So if we come down and we bounce here, this is the second place next week on a pullback. I'd be interested in a near-term buying opportunity in silver. So that is it from me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, why not consider joining us in the GMT training room each day where I go through the best markets as well as sharing the real-time setups that I'm personally looking at trading with members as part of our GMT training program. Don't forget, anyone who signs up to GMT in December also gets the brand new Hedge Dash trading app completely free for 12 months. This offer expires at the end of December.